Hey, Sinister C6 here, hopefully with the last video that I make without the car. Just got some good news that we're nearing completion. This has been a heck of a wait, and I am flying out later this week to go test drive it. Now, what a lot of people don't know is I've actually had this thing since 2006. And if you look back on my older videos, it's gone through a number of stages. It's been supercharged, naturally aspirated, and I went through my log because I've kept track of every drive I've ever taken with it, and wanted to just summarize everything that it took to get to this place. So the story of it starts in 2006. I was 18 years old, wanted a Corvette ever since I was about 4 years old. Here's a picture of driving that when I was a kid, and grew up around them. My uncle had the C3 generation that he was collecting, another one had C4s, so just immersed with them from a young age, and finally got the opportunity to get my own. There's a picture of the day I got mine. It was August 16th, 2006. And I drove the fool out of this thing, anywhere I could go with it. I was driving it. It wasn't a daily driver, but surely if it was a nice day, I was on the road. And somebody at a gas station commented because it was black paint with optional gray wheels, it looked sinister. And that's where the whole thing kind of took off. That winter, I blacked everything out. I was using nightshades for you older guys, remembering that stuff. And by March of 2008, I wanted it louder. So in my living room, I cut up a aftermarket exhaust system with long tube headers, put on cutouts and welded them with a buddy, brought it over to a local speed shop in Chicago, Speeding, who tuned it, ended up making about 400 at the wheels. So car was doing great. Still reliable, driving it all the time, until April of 2010, racked up 14,000 miles. Now, going to all these car shows, being on the car forum, supercharger builds were really popular. You could get a hold of one for a couple $1,000s. I ended up getting a ECS, East Coast Supercharging kit that I installed myself, got back to Speeding, tuned it to the order of 650 horsepower. And it was still reliable. I was getting a little bit of a hiccup now with the accessory belt falling off while you're driving, because it's normal. At least when you talk to them, it was normal. And determined that there was a problem with the pulley not having shoulders. So to illustrate that, there's your pulley and serpentine belt. This one didn't have shoulders, so you just fly off and do what it wanted. They sent me a new pulley, problem solved. I drove this setup all the time. Was making videos, was reliable, racked up almost 11,000 miles on it. So now we're at 24,900. And the horsepower bug bit. During this blower build, I had AMS performance, the crazy GTR people who are Chicago based, retune it with methanol, and we got to 750 horsepower, which was good, but it wasn't enough to take down some of these bigger builds. So around late 2000, or around 2012, started thinking turbo systems, and really none of the off-the-shelf systems would cut it. Most I could get on pump gas would be 800-900 horsepower, and if I was going to spend 30 grand, I really didn't want to I wanted to break the 1,000 horsepower barrier. And seeing a build from LMR Performance, they mounted turbos in the back of the car in place of the muffler, and I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. Talking to a lot of different people, ended up with the idea of replacing the fuel tanks with the turbo system. Now, no one wanted to touch this. No one in the area, at least. Enter Vengeance Racing. Ron Moen was really enthusiastic about the idea. They were up and coming at the time. This is 2012. They really wanted to showcase what their fabrication capabilities were. So I drove the car across the country That's how reliable it was with the supercharger. Got it down to them in December of 2012. We spec'd out a motor, a fuel system, drivetrain, pretty much tore the car apart. They helped with some wiring, just really build a solid car. And they did it quickly. By September of 2013, we're making jam. At that point, it's 1,500 horsepower. Huge amount. People on the forum were telling me it's going to drive horribly, it's not going to perform. And his idea was to test it and want to go fast. That was a big thing back in like the early 2010s. So first time out, very first pass, not driving this car for 9 months, I hit 187 miles an hour. Sick. Second, third, couple more passes, I think 3 or 4 in total, and I hit 195 miles an hour. Shot down a lot of internet naysayers. Here's a picture of what the setup looked like, and the car comes home. The car's home with me, and put about, how many now? About 3,000 miles. Driving it not as often, because at that power level, there's a lot more work involved. You're checking fluids, you're going over all the connections to check for leaks. Really didn't have any major problems at that point. And a year later, September 2014, after lots of miles of adjusting the boost controller, the ramp rate, found the limit of traction with my tires, I hit 203 miles an hour. And this is a 6-speed manual, no traction control, no assistance. So absolutely sick. Unfortunately, the motor didn't think it was sick, and a head gasket got lifted. So car goes back to them. They're looking over everything. Looks like the motor could have been a little bit stronger in some areas, and I get a sweet deal with them for a sponsorship. It included rebuilding the motor, bigger turbos, getting Pro EFI to help sponsor a new computer. There was a new intake manifold with the hood cut out that came in, and things were doing good until they weren't. Get out to the next Wanna Go Fast event, it really doesn't perform any better. I think I only hit like 189 miles an hour. It was enough for the fastest rear wheel drive again, my third award for that, but it didn't go any quicker. And then car comes home, and everything sort of starts going to pot. I had coolant lines come apart and start leaking. I had the turbocharger sort of seize up and need to be rebuilt. 2 or 3 fuel pumps, because those Magna Fuel brushed pumps just weren't reliable or made for street duty. The Pro EFI traction control would just erroneously go off. Throttle body would slam shut. If you name it, I probably had a problem with it. And it was okay, I was still kind of determined, but get out to another Wanna Go Fast event. This time is September of 2015, so we're 2 years into owning this turbo setup. And it breaks again, another head gasket. And if you're keeping count, I think that's the 3rd motor. So another engine builder looks at it, and it looks like the sleeves in that RHS block never got appropriately pressed in. Something to do with thermal expansion, and under load they were coming out. Not coming out, but sliding enough to lift the head. It kind of frustrated me that I was having so many problems. I was young and naive and thought I could do it better on my own. And by January of 2016, car comes home and I just start looking for new options. So that's when I moved to Tennessee, started making friends here. Was going to local events, it was pretty popular. It was still a fun car to drive when it wasn't blowing up or having problems. And a local shop to me just reaches out and here's all your issues. We're willing to help you. We're up and coming too. Give us the chance to fix it, and we'll kind of showcase what we can do. We're proficient in Pro EFI. We'll get that all sorted out for you. Sounded really good, doesn't it? Until it wasn't. More on that. So By April, is that right? April of 2016, a mere 3,000 miles on this new turbo setup, and the local shop starts to dig into it. We had plans to change the transmission to a face-plated setup from RPM, to swap out the fuel pump, I think I was on my third one at this time, to a mechanical setup so it would actually handle fuel flow and last. We talked about bigger turbos because bigger is better, and then most importantly, a fresh engine. Kurt Urban was selected to build me a motor. It would be an LSX-based block with no sleeves to slide, and a goal of 2,000 horsepower. Seems easy, right? They made it seem easy. Well, problem is they employed a lot of young workers. And first thing to kind of red flag was everything got taken off the car in a few days and just put into a pile. The nuts and bolts were not organized. It looked like something out of your kid's Lego set. And there was no shortage of complications. They had a lot of people leave. Their fabricator quit. So all these turbo pipes that needed to be made were constructed by a third-party fabricator who had no idea or had no communication as to what the car was being used for, and actually stacked circular pipes underneath the car. So I had like an inch of ground clearance. He really didn't understand what he did wrong. Went back and forth a few times, had to tear out all his stuff. The fuel tank that got cut apart was welded, and one of their interns lifted the car from the floor pan. What else happened? We lost some parts, the ABS module. The mechanical fuel pump was spec'd for, well, it was attached to the engine via fuel pump. It was attached to the engine via oil pump. You're not supposed to do that, apparently. That's too fast. It would have cavitated and blown up. So all of this goes on. Car got to them in April of 16. We're finally on the dyno on August of 2019. So my 6-week estimate turned into almost 3 years. Over 3 years, 3.5. And made a few pulls, find out the oil pressure's dropping. No engine damage occurs, but motor builders suggest you need a 5-gallon tank. Where end up looking all over the car. The stock location was chosen, but we cut out a lot of metal in that area. Nothing structural, that'd be bad. But got room, filled it with a NASCAR oil tank, and we're back on the dyno in a whole 2 months. When all the other gremlins came to life, alternator went out, they had to be replaced. Coils couldn't keep up, they got replaced. Spark plugs, tensioner, front end accessory drive, coolant issues. Turbos were not draining properly, so the intake pipe filled up with oil at one point. Everything you can think of. I do finally get actual dyno numbers by like late October. Looks good, we're happy, we're ready to start street driving, and we can hear a tick. Turns out somewhere in the 2-3 weeks of dyno pulls and troubleshooting, the lifter seized up right there on the lifter seized up right there against the cam, and it showered the motor with metal, drained the oil, and it looked like a starry night sky. So motor's back out, off to Kurt Urban, and he tears it apart, cleans it up. We had to replace one piston and gets it back to me. At this point, it's July of 2020, and we start street driving it. And by September, the car is finished and with a whole 30,800 miles. So, great. It was back here in this garage, of all places, and actually got to use it for what it was made for. Driving on the weekends, having some fun. Only got 600 miles, it looks like. Yeah, 600 miles. And the drive shaft uncoupled itself. Somewhere in there, no one put Loctite or lock washers on the prop shaft bolts. So it popped out, couldn't drive it home. Get it shipped back to their shop here in town and drain the transmission fluid, and it's full of oil. Or no, it is full of oil, that's good. It was full of metal, that's bad. Send a pic to RPM, ask them about some sort of warranty work because it was, their best version of a transmission, face plated, should have handled 2,000 horsepower, and no sir, no can do, can't help you. Okay, TIC Performance gets the transmission to rebuild it, and there was spacing, one of the gears was against the casing or touching the casing, something, and like, this thing's gotta go. So sure, let's replace the transmission. Unfortunately, COVID had other plans, and by the time the transmission gets here, 5 months later, the shop's closing down. And unfortunately, my mom had just passed away, so I really didn't have time to go over there and try to fix it. They offered me 2 weeks to try to put it together and get it home. So I bring it back here on the back of a flatbed, and as you can see in this picture, it's a disaster. Nothing's labeled. I'm okay with a wrench, but not that okay. That really needed some serious help or an exorcist to fix. And the car sort of just sat in limbo. Sat in limbo from August until December. While I was talking to the engine builder about kind of stripping everything out and just making it naturally aspirated again, he recommended I talk to some Corvette experts in Texas, G-Speed. So they thought it would be an easy rebuild. They quote me some money, and 4 months of work seemed reasonable, and they get the car, and heck no, there was a lot wrong with it. This thing ended up being a complete rebuild. New hoses, new wiring. I guess there was speaker wire found throughout. The fab work had to be redone, ditch the fuel tank that was leaking, whole new drivetrain had to go in, because that RPM differential I paid for back in 2012 when this started wasn't a Z06 or ZR1 version. How it survived, I don't know. They end up switching me over to Motec, find that my blow-off valves were fake, so that got fixed. Looked at that transmission, thought about computer controlling it with no lift shift, and ended up just deciding on a sequential. We already blew that budget way out of expectations. So what's a sequential transmission? Put that in, and yeah, the whole car got rebuilt. So that's cool. By April of this year, we're on the dyno. Car makes like a cool 800 horsepower on the wastegates. It's doing good until the head gasket, the cylinder head lifts, and we take out another head gasket. That's a theme here. I don't know why it wasn't O-ringed. I don't know why it was a 3-layer head gasket, but what I do know is that motor was toast. Here's a picture. The motor builder blamed the tuner, stating that there was knock, but as you can see, that's an undamaged piston. So I get to buy a new motor. We did that, and we're finally done on the dyno with our new professionally built engine. It was made in-house, so everything got measured to a T. The parts that weren't going to be up to snuff for durability, like the valve springs, valves, other components, were all replaced or adjusted. And that brings us up to today, September of 2024. And I finally get to drive the car. So flying out there in a few days. If you were keeping track, so if you got nothing out of this video, the persistence here, I hope you guys can appreciate that, because we're on the 6th motor, the 4th transmission, the 3rd set of turbos, and the 4th ECU system, all of here including stock components. We're 14,000 miles naturally aspirated, 11,000 miles supercharged, 4,500 on the version 1 turbo system, 1,700 miles on version 2 turbo system. So I hope the car performs as well as everyone's hoping, and I can just drive the fool out of this thing, because by golly, this long I've been wanting to drive it. So look forward to more videos, less talking, more shifting, and can't wait to see you guys soon.